Hey everyone, welcome back to the Leadership Project with your host Mick Spears. Our vision is to inspire all leaders to challenge the status quo. We bring you weekly topics and thought-provoking guests to get you to stop, reflect, and think about what it means to be a leader in a modern world. Our aim is to help you become the leader you wish you always had, as we learn together and lead together. Today's episode is brought to you by my new book, You're a Leader, Now What? The Proven Path to High-Performance Leadership. The book contains many of the great lessons that we've been learning together during the Leadership Project podcast, together with many other lessons that I've collected over my 30-year career as a leader. The book is aimed at first-time leaders, but really there's lessons in there for everyone. It would be greatly appreciated if you could go and grab your copy on Amazon as either an ebook or a paperback, and if you could leave us an honest review on Amazon. Now, on with the show. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project. I'm greatly honoured today to be joined by Marc Polymeropoulos. Marc retired in 2019 after a 26-year career in the CIA, leading large teams in all kinds of things from counterterrorism into clandestine operations. You name it, he's done it. And after leaving, he became the author of the book Clarity in Crisis, Leadership Lessons from the CIA. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Every one of us as a leader ends up in situations, stressful situations, crisis management situations, that we need to work out how we're going to get through that, or even better still, try to turn these crisis situations into some kind of positive development for our organizations. So I'm greatly honored to be joined by Marc today. Marc, please say hello to our audience. Give a little bit more about your background and what led you to be with us today.
So first of all, Mick, thanks so much for being here. It's a great honor. I love being able to come on a show like this and really kind of dive deep into a topic instead of doing just a 1 or 2 minute quick sound bites. So we have lots to talk about today. I spent 26 years at the CIA. I think I entered the service, not as a great leader. I never believed that leaders are born. I think they're made. I think by the end of my career, I became a very good leader. So as I was retiring, I thought about some of the principles that really, helped me in some tough times. And so I just wanted to kind of write about it. And it's not about me. It's not an autobiography. In fact, I'm pretty humble. I talk a lot about failure, but it's really relevant to kind of everyday people. Life is hard. So the ability to deal with, adversity, which is really something that we all know about, in our day-to-day lives. I think that's really important. And so I really enjoy talking to people about it. I think they're going to get a lot out of the book, and I'm excited to be here today to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you, Marc. And I want to say thank you deeply right now before we start on behalf of all of us. If I can be really open with you, the majority of us live our lives. We go shopping, we have our families, we have work, we go play golf, all of these kind of things. And yet people like you for 26 years of your life have been out there living a different world that's there to create a safer and a more friendly planet. So thank you on behalf of all of us. I don't think that any of us can properly imagine in our wildest dreams some of the things that you've been through in that 26 years. So I want to acknowledge you first of all, and thank you on behalf of all of us for the work that you do. Thank you.
Well, that's very kind of you. At the end, it was a unique job. I think a lot of us, felt that it was a privilege to be able to serve. It takes a lot to get into the CIA. But a lot of times, particularly with 20 years, working on counterterrorism, we felt we were the ones, standing on the ramparts. We were the ones, really helping defend, and not just the United States, but our friends and allies across the globe. And so it is a special feeling. And, you do kind of, you walk proud, you walk tall. there were a lot of tough times. I have a lot of friends, who we lost in battle. There was really awful things that I saw and that have deeply affected me. But again, the idea of public service, of working for the right reasons. I chose not to go to, I wasn't a lawyer. I didn't go on Wall Street to be a big banker. A lot of my college friends did, but I really believed in serving my country. So I'm really proud of that. And yeah, it was a unique job. I'm happy in retirement now. I can, go to the beach, read a book, go watch my, beloved Boston Red Sox baseball team. I'm wearing the t-shirt now. But it was a heck of a ride. There's no doubt about that.
I might actually circle back to that bit about purpose and meaning later. I'd like to know a little bit more about what makes you tick and what keeps you going. And I think that there's a line of questioning that might come up that will expose that. So I think we will come back to that. There was something that I read about in your materials about, am I ready to lead? So you were getting helicoptered into a new environment with a new team. And as you're getting into that environment, which was a critical leadership role, you were asking yourself the question, am I ready to lead? Tell us more about that question.
Sure. So this was in 2011. I was assigned to be a base chief in Afghanistan. But before that, it's kind of interesting how I even got there. So I was overseas in the Middle East. I was involved in an operation where several of my colleagues were killed, and I had a tremendous sense of anger and guilt. I came back from that, and I went into the Middle East operations chief's office, and I said, send me to the worst place on the planet. And he said, okay, I have the place for you. And it was a paramilitary base in eastern Afghanistan along the Pakistan-Afghanistan border. I was going to be the base chief. I had about 20 Americans. Our job was to hunt down, collect intelligence on Al Qaeda and the Taliban, kind of senior figures who obviously had been responsible for the deaths of American soldiers, but also were plotting, further attacks. And I had 20 Americans. I was going to be there for a year. I knew there was going to be kind of active combat. And as I was flying in on the helicopter in the middle of the night, it's a midnight infill because of the risk of indirect fire. I did kind of question myself. I said, frankly, to be honest, holy crap, am I really ready for this? I knew I would be tested in ways I had never been tested before. And so, it's okay. Having that feeling is okay. And I kind of had this talk with myself and say, all right, let's go. This is way out of my comfort zone. And that's a really interesting leadership concept too, because I think actually that's how you grow. But ultimately this was an amazing test over the year. I did some good things. I made some mistakes, but there's a part of that afterwards when I left and a year later when the helicopter took off, I was really proud. I looked a little different. I have a little beard now. I had a huge beard. My hair is going now, but I had longer hair. And I really thought to myself, I did this right. And I felt really proud of what we had done. But as a leader, putting yourself in these uncomfortable positions, it's okay to kind of question yourself sometimes. Am I ready? And I really did that. It was an extraordinary year. It's something I'm really proud of, and I'll never forget.
I'd like to unpack that one now. I want this interview to be full of takeaways that our leaders can think of. And what I want to share with you, Marc, is that many leaders experience that, particularly in their first leadership role, but it can happen as they move into senior management, as they move into executive roles. There's that moment. Some people will call it imposter syndrome, but it's that moment of anxiety. So they've usually gone through a roller coaster of emotions. They've been promoted, so they've got this euphoric high of, wow, I've finally been recognized for the great leader that I can become, or for my work, whatever the case may be. And then either the day of or sometimes the day before, this thud of anxiety of, am I ready to lead? Am I going to be a good leader? Can I do this? So tell me about what you told yourself, all right? So you asked yourself that question, but it seems like you turned it into a constructive question, not a negative question. Tell us more about how you processed it.
Well, right, Mick, it's a super constructive question I asked myself, and and this is a really good lesson for others. And so, the second I hit the ground, my job is to learn. And there's a great old adage that people use in my old job in the intelligence community. If you're talking, you ain't listening. And so I don't have to go there and tell everybody how great I am. My job was to listen to the team, from the team that I had. So I had 20 Americans there. And, one of the things I learned about leadership, particularly in that year, is, great leaders don't have to be smarter than everybody that they lead. In fact, my job was to harness all of their talents. And so some of them were experts on certain things that we really needed for that deployment. Well, I was going to listen to them. I wasn't going to dictate. I was going to listen. At the end of the day, I would obviously make decisions and people had to follow that. But it was a very inclusive style that I decided to employ, particularly because I was out of my comfort zone. And, I think that's really important because, that's not showing weakness. That's actually showing tremendous leadership. You want input from your team, and then you make the correct decisions. And people will respect that for a variety of reasons. One is they want to be heard. They're going to get an opportunity to be heard, even if it doesn't go their way. And then again, my job is not to be smarter than everybody. My job is to harness the talents of those 20 Americans on the ground. And so, that's what I learned there is I didn't have to kind of roll into that with any kind of bravado. In fact, one of the things that it's a huge misnomer in the world of intelligence and special operations is that you have to have this type A personality. It's actually the opposite. You have to be confident, but you have to have this willingness to listen, to learn, to adapt. And again, it's harnessing, all these, the talents of the members of your team. That's how we were successful. Certainly not by me just dictating. And so, that's just one of the things I learned. And I love telling those stories because I think that's applicable in all walks of life.
There is a stereotype that many people develop that it is the type A personality that is the strong leader, if you like. But the truly successful leaders are doing what you do, Marc, right? So, and the four things that I took away there: listening, bringing people around you that have got their own superpowers and harnessing that, and that you were learning every day, that you didn't have to be the smartest person in the room, and you were learning every day because of the people around you. That's wonderful. All right, tell me about Charlie's Way. This was right at the start of your wonderful book. What does Charlie's Way mean?
So Charlie Seidel was a legendary CIA officer. He was one of my mentors. He's probably mentored the entire kind of cadre of Near East operations officers at CIA, including even present day leadership in the building. He's unfortunately passed away. But I mentioned him in the book for kind of a variety of reasons. But again, he was this kind of tremendous empathetic leader. One of the principles in my book, I call it family values. And that's the idea that, it's this, obviously it's a term that's used all over the place, but it's the idea that, it's okay to have this kind of close knit, and I would even say, love between team members. And that's going to get you through really tough times. And I tell the story of Charlie as follows. I tell lots of stories about Charlie in the book, but we were, I was with Charlie, and we went in with naval special warfare units into Baghdad as the U.S. In April of 2003, April of 2003 is with the U.S. invasion of Iraq. Our job was to hunt down high value targets, and Charlie was my boss, and I was one of the operations officers on the street. And for a good several months, we were kind of running and gunning every night. And I came back from that really changed. I was not well. I saw a lot of bad things. I participated in things where people lost their lives. And I came back, and I remember my wife was really scared because I clearly had, post-traumatic stress, PTS, and I was having terrible nightmares. And the story goes as follows. She kind of contacted Charlie about this. And so Charlie organized a retreat, in essence, from our original team that were together for months in Iraq. He had a small cottage on the beach in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. He invited us all together. And he did so primarily because he wanted to get that kind of that family values environment again, that really kind of warm, comforting environment we had, even from a war zone. But he brought it to the beaches of Cape Cod, and because he thought that would help me, and it really did. And my wife tells the story; she was really scared. But those 2 weeks in Cape Cod, was kind of this tremendous kind of moment or moments for me where I was with people that I felt comfortable with. My family was there too. But Charlie did that for me. And that to me was kind of the epitome so much of, as a leader, he didn't have to. It had nothing to do with future assignments or, operations or world affairs. It was because he cared about me. And I love telling that story about him. I'll never forget that. When I went to his funeral, interestingly, in Northern Virginia several years ago, he retired, but he passed away. I get emotional even thinking about it. I was touched because his family, had gone through his records, and there was a picture of Charlie and I together in Iraq, and it was prominently displayed in the funeral home, and I was blown away by that. But again, it's someone who had just a tremendous effect on. But he got it. He understood that what leadership was about, and there's a personal side of it, and he took his time to really take care of me, and I'll never forget that.
There's a number of things that are popping into my head listening to that, Mark. So the first one, and it's a pretty famous Simon Sinek quote that he uses, which is, leadership is not about being in charge. It's about taking care of those in your charge. And what I'm hearing there from Charlie is that in spades, all right? So taking care of the people around him. And the second thing is that it becomes even more important at that person's most time of need, and in this case, some kind of trauma. And once again, I'll say this again, we all have our own traumas in our life, but the majority of us listening to this show can probably not imagine the traumas that you and your team went through, but to have that person that cared deeply about you, I can see how powerful that was.
The neat thing about it, and Charlie was known all over the Middle East, and so his funeral was incredible. There was people, there was Arab royalty, there was Kurdish officials. I mean, it was Charlie was known from the palaces of Iraq and and the presidential offices in Egypt and Jordan, all over the region. And there's one other key part about him that I should mention is he had absolutely no heirs whatsoever. So he was welcomed and beloved by the kind of most lowly member. Look, the Middle Eastern society is very stratified. And so he would talk to the street sweepers. He would talk to, they call the boab, the doormen all over the place. He was known by everyone. He had this huge infectious smile, and what a really important lesson that is too, because he just treated everybody fairly. And so, one of the things I want to do, we're talking about my book now. I want to write a future book about him.
Yeah, good.
I really do. I wrote an article about him in the U.S. Media maybe a year ago, just because and I called him the last great American Arabist, because he had that kind of effect. He was a tremendous ambassador to the Arab world, because he treated everybody so kindly. Everyone from an Arab prince, to someone who's a taxi driver on the street, and they all knew him just by his first name. Like, if you want to have a legacy, I wish someone would, maybe it's Mick or it's Mark, his name, this was Charlie. And if you mention that name, Charlie, in intelligence and foreign policy circles in the Middle East, everyone knows what you're talking about.
Wow. Yeah. What an amazing person. And you definitely should write that book for sure. Right. The things that I take about there is leadership is all about how you relate to other people. And it sounds like Charlie was relatable to people from all walks of life and treated them all like they mattered. And people remember that stuff, right? So
they do.
Absolutely.
What an ambassador he was as well, for the United States, frankly.
Yeah.
Just, at a time where, we struggle in the Middle East often, to be understood. There's a lot of, controversy over U.S. foreign policy, but, he was as good an ambassador you'll ever find.
Yeah, right. Okay, so I want to dig deeper now into your 9 principles that are in the book.
Sure.
And you've already covered part of this by saying that you get people around you that you don't have to be the smartest person. You don't have to do everything. You bring people around you that all have a role to play, that all have their own strength, their own superpower, so to speak, and it's your collective that makes you effective. The first principle that you talk about is the glue guy. What does the glue guy mean?
So this is my favorite principle, and I think it applies, as we talked about just at the beginning of the show. The glue guy is the notion. By the way, you have to say glue guy or glue gal, and I kick myself for not putting that in the book. But it's the idea of there are indispensable members of your team who are not going to be your rock stars. They're not going to be the most valuable player on a sports team. They're not going to be a case officer of the CIA. They're not going to be a door kicker for SEAL Team 6. But frankly, they're just as important in any operation slash, business unit, proposal, anything. And so as a leader, you have to do two things. You have to, first of all, understand and identify these people. And then number two, celebrate their successes, because it's just as important, frankly, in a company, if there's a huge success in a company, what about the IT guy? What about the secretaries, the executive assistants, everything, all the pieces that make kind of the workflow or everything function? They have to be celebrated. And then the last point is you have to involve them in planning sessions. And so, the idea of the glue guy or the glue gal to me is so fundamental. And I learned it late. And I'll tell the story. I remember I came back from Iraq and I received a Distinguished Intelligence Medal. It's the agency's second highest award. And I really felt great about myself. Here I am as badass. But I made a mistake. I didn't thank people around me. How did I get there? It was for specific operations, but those operations have a big tail to it. And I never thanked those people. And I kick myself to this day because, again, success of a business unit is really made up of all the different parts that go into it. And you really have to honor everybody. You have to certainly celebrate their successes, and you have to involve them in the planning. And this is just so fundamental and basic. I use American sports analogies all the time. I use American football on one. So, I once went and talked to a college football team. And I went to the quarterback, who was this, tremendous athlete, getting all the everything written about him in the media. And I said to him, who's your glue guys? And he looked over at the table of offensive linemen. That's the individuals in front of him who protect him. And he pointed to them and they all cheered. So I was like, okay, you got it. You understand what I'm talking about here. You can't be a superstar without these critical pieces of the puzzle. They're not going to get all the accolades. But you know what? You better celebrate their successes, and you better involve them in their planning. So I think it really relates, and it's just one of these things that fundamentally you have to really understand as a leader. And what I'm trying to do is sometimes it takes some time to get that. Hopefully, if someone reads the book, they'll kind of do that earlier in their career. But I love this principle. It's something I teach my kids, and so I think it really resonates.
Yeah, you're making me think of, I don't know if you've seen this documentary, but The Last Dance with the Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan.
Absolutely. Love it.
And Michael Jordan, he was clearly going to be a superstar. That was clear from the outset. But he did not win any championship rings, et cetera, by himself. He was not even that successful early days until the team built around him, until you had Scottie Pippen, until you had Dennis Rodman getting those rebounds, until you had Phil Jackson as the coach who's not even on the court looking from the side, and Jerry Krause, and
that's right.
Even down
it's all those parts together. So, and let me jump in on I love the Michael Jackson analogy because you can use him for a lot of things in terms of leadership. But Michael Jackson practiced harder than or as hard or even harder as he played in games. And so he talked about the importance of practice. So who is there on the practice court? They're not all starters. Some of them will never be written about in the newspapers.
There you go.
But that was integral to the success of the team because he practiced so hard. He pushed the team so hard in practice that they were then successful, in the actual game. So those are the glue guys.
Yeah.
Those practice players, and when I go and I talk to sports teams, I talk about this all the time. And so you better celebrate everybody. And the whole notion of my book, of course, is under times of crisis, how you respond is going to be based on some of these fundamental principles. Well, it's it right there. You better know that a well-functioning, high-performance elite team is going to have all those people behind the scenes, and then you have the confidence to deal with crises. So I love the Michael Jordan analogy in so many different ways. And then there's other things. We'll talk about some of my other principles that I raise him as well.
Yeah, great. I want to summarize it for the audience here then. So this glue guy, and please correct me if you think I go on a tangent, right? So have a think now. If you're listening in the audience, have a think about your team right now. Look left, look right, look behind you, look ahead of you. Who are those people that are just so good at what they do? They're so reliable that you don't have to think about that anymore. There's someone there that has got it. They've got that task. They've got that activity. They've got that role to the point where you don't even have to think about it anymore. And because you don't have to think about it, you've then got the brain capacity to focus on the next thing or the thing ahead of us or the thing 5 miles down the road from us It gives you space to be able to breathe, to be able to think and to have clarity. And what Marc is sharing with you here is look for those people and celebrate them. Make them feel like they matter, because they can be forgotten very easily, and yet you will not be successful without them. How's that for a summary?
Spot on.
All right, brilliant. Let's move to number 2. Adversity is a performance-enhancing drug. Tell us about that.
Right. So when I go talk to sports teams, I always have to say, particularly college teams, I'm not advocating taking PEDs. No, but so adversity is the PED to success is the notion, and I really believe this, is that elite teams are going to have to fail at first before they ultimately succeed. And so you raised a great point before. Michael Jordan. What happened Michael Jordan's sophomore year in high school, his second year in high school? He got cut from his high school basketball team, but that becomes his superpower. So my contention is, adversity becomes your superpower to succeed in crisis situations. And so, I would love to, when I was an executive at CIA, when I was interviewing people for jobs, I would ask them, have you ever failed before? And they would say no. And they would not get the job. I want to hear how they've failed, what adversity they've gone through, and how they've grown from it. I tell some stories in the book, which are really personal, and I'll summarize them, quickly now, but it was a span of about 10 years. I was in Iraq, living up in the mountains in Kurdistan before the war. And we had recruited an Iraqi, an agent, who was giving us what we call order of battle information on Saddam Hussein's military, which was really important for Pentagon planners. And ultimately it was my job to handle him. He was spying for us. But I pushed him too hard, and tragically he was caught and he was tortured and he was executed. And I never forgot that, because that was on me. That was adversity that I faced. Clearly it was a terrible tragedy. Years later in Afghanistan, we had another high profile operation. We actually were looking for a Taliban member who was responsible for the deaths of 2 CIA officers. Same kind of pressure back from our headquarters to really find this individual. Not only had he been responsible for killing 2 of my colleagues, but he was still plotting attacks. But I had learned from that, and I was much more patient. I didn't push the agents we recruited. There was a lot of pressure on me, but I really remembered that the previous situation, and ultimately we found this individual, and he was taken off the battlefield by the U.S. military. And I remember that night we were sitting around a fire pit in eastern Afghanistan, and we took a satellite phone and we called the widow of one of our officers who was killed, and we told her that we had avenged her husband's death. And I really sat there and I thought about, kind of that 10-year, journey I had been on, where I'd faced this adversity. It really still haunted me that someone I was responsible for had been killed. And then later on, we did something really good, helping to protect Americans, and of course, giving some closure to the widow of one of our officers. So I really do think that idea of adversity is really powerful. But it almost goes to one of the fundamentals that I always talk about is that, is to be humble, to realize bad things are going to happen. And so you don't want something bad to happen. But adversity is something that is part of life. And so you kind of have to embrace it and you learn from it. And I really think that high performance teams, if they go through that and they take those lessons, can be super successful when times are tough. And so it's a principle I really believe in. So
we're building on here a learning mindset. So you are going to fail. Let's face it.
You are going to fail.
You're going to fail at some point in your life, and the magnitude of that failure may be minor through to something catastrophic, but you are going to fail. And if you learn from it and go again, then that failure wasn't all without kind of some level of virtue to it. So if you can turn it into a learning, at least you can get a positive out of it. And we fail every day in some respects.
That's right.
All right. Yeah, really.
You got to pick yourself up by your bootstraps. I mean, if you look, and again, it's, I talk to audiences all around the world, so I got to be careful on the sports analogies but every great sports team, I believe, when they reach that pinnacle of success, we'll look back and they'll say, okay, we failed at one point, maybe the season before or the season before that. What did we learn? And so, and I think people really understand it, and this resonates because life is hard. I talk to my kids all the time about this. You're going to face adversity, and it's how you react at this time is really going to define you. And so that's really important. Are
you going to drop your bundle, or are you going to process it and learn from it and go again?
Yeah.
I'll continue the sports analogies just for a moment. There's a saying in Australia where I grew up, that you need to lose a grand final before you win one, and
Right.
it's about actually not just the learning, it's actually the feeling then as well becomes the motivator. So if you lose that grand final in those, I'm going to call them precious moments here carefully, in those precious
Right.
moments where you're on the field and the other team is celebrating, capture that feeling of how it feels right there, and know that you never want to feel like that again.
Exactly.
And use that as your fuel for train harder, train smarter, learn from it, and come out next year and you'll win the grand final. How does that?
That is your super fuel. I say it all the time.
Yeah,
Adversity is
cool.
your super fuel, and when you understand that, it's almost it's almost a release. It takes pressure off of you.
Yeah, cool.
And so because when you get in those tough situations again, you think back, okay, I don't want to feel that way again, but what did I learn? And you have this, and you do have this more of this clarity, and so this is appropriate in any profession. Because again, we fail in life. It's part of what you do. One of the things I don't do in the book, and some of my friends from the Navy SEALs and the special operations world don't like when I say this, but I'm not sitting here screaming that we should charge the hill. I'm not pounding my chest. I mean, I'm talking about real things, which is failure. How do you deal with adversity? And so I think that's why people have really responded to kind of what I've been saying, is because they can identify it. It's always great to give a rah-rah speech and charge up the hill. I always joke with my friends from the Navy SEAL teams that, in their we call it the BUDS training and their dive training, they get their book deal. So, but ultimately that to me is not as real in life. And so just dealing with adversity is something that is just super important, that everyone really can relate to.
I'll share something from the corporate world, and I'd love to get your view on this one as well. Sure. The other thing that can happen if you're not careful is a negative learning circle. And I've seen this happen countless times in my corporate career. So 30 years in corporate life until recently, right? And the thing it could be is that, let's say a project is a failure. You lose a chunk of money, right? So you put in all of this effort, et cetera, on doing a new business line or something like that, and you lose a bunch of money on that very first project. For me, the negative learning would be when the business learns never to do that again, right? So let's say I'll have to be careful because I don't want to give away too many examples and people will know what I'm talking about. But let's say that you lose £12 million on a project, and then corporately you decide that, okay, we're never going to do that type of project again. Well, you've lost all of those lessons. Whereas if you can constructively go, okay, let's do project 2, let's do project 3, let's do project 4, the investment that you made in that first project that may have been a disaster might pay off. Now, I'm not saying that you just keep on going blindly and keep on repeating the same mistakes of the past, but if you've learned from it, don't stop, keep going.
Oh, absolutely. Right. Yeah. No, you have to learn. And that's why I think, the most successful teams I saw in the military and special operations were those that constantly performed after action reviews. Even on successful operations, there's always something to learn. There's always something you can do better. And I think one of the things people would be surprised about is in my old world, how critical we were. It's constructively critical, but critical we were of everything we did. Even if it was a success, and say, okay, what did we do here? And so it is not a bad idea to go back and kind of take a look and deconstruct. And so, that's what we did all the time. And so I think that's, because you're right, because there's going to be lessons learned from everything. But you don't want to just give up. You don't, especially if the concept of the idea is worthwhile. You might have lost 12 million pounds, but there's a lot you could have learned in that to kind of regroup and go at it again.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, all right. Thank you, Marc. The other word that comes to mind, you've already mentioned this a few times in the interview, but when I read the word adversity, I also think about comfort zone. And you were speaking before about getting out of your comfort zone. Tell us about the power of that.
So, that is the fundamental essence of the book, is that what I want people to understand is, first of all, in order to, I think, just advance as a human, we have to push ourselves in anything, out of our comfort zones. But you also want to be, you want to be the one to kind of say, send me. We operated in this period of gray. We always, I love that. So when when there's a lack of situational awareness, when everyone else wants to flee, you want to be the one to say, send me, because I can do this. That's my happy place. I would always say this is our happy place. Frankly, the shit's hit, it's hit the fan. Sorry to use a term there, but that's okay. We're good. And why is that? Well, because you have these kind of fundamental principles where you can, understand that you can operate quite successfully in that period of gray. And so getting outside your comfort zone, I think, is how we evolve, is how we learn. But it's also a place that you can operate effectively, because if you have these fundamentals that I talk about, it gives you kind of that inner strength and resolve to make good decisions, even if things are not great. My contention is everybody can lead, when times are good, if there's situational awareness. If you are in the business sector, if the economy is doing fantastic, okay, that's easy. What about in times for a company during COVID? How did companies manage that? Well, I would argue that is critical. That is where, leading in times of tremendous uncertainty, that takes a special skill. And that's what I want to kind of, talk to people about. That's getting out of your comfort zone, but there are things you can do to make it easier.
Yeah, great. Getting just out of the edge of your comfort zone and maybe just a little bit beyond is where great things can happen. And with the right mindset, you turn stress into a superpower. Redefine your relationship with stress, as Roberta Whitney Hughes, one of our recent guests, would describe it, to turn it into something that fuels you, empowers you, and motivates you into action. Yeah, great. All right.
This is going to sound silly, but I'll never forget this interview I saw with Tom Cruise, the actor. So interestingly enough, Tom Cruise said occasionally he would get nervous on the set. He was out of his comfort zone. And so he would do something. And I thought about this for years after I saw this interview. He would actually talk to himself. He'd ask himself, why am I nervous right now? What is making me feel so uncomfortable? And I love that interview because, and I use that later on in my career, because again, it's getting out of your comfort zone, but it's kind of, stepping back, and you're saying to yourself, I got butterflies in my stomach. I'm a little nervous. I'm a little stressed, but why? What's the worst thing that can happen? What can I do to control things right now? This is stuff I've taught my kids. My son plays, he's a baseball player. He's playing in college now. So, there are times where he is nervous. So I would tell him, okay, ask yourself why. Take a deep breath, kind of sit back. What is causing you this kind of stress now? And I like that idea of being able to from the Tom Cruise interview, to talk to yourself about this. I know it sounds silly. I don't know if Tom Cruise is considered a great leadership figure, but I learned a lot from that, and I thought about it for years after.
No, there's a great lesson there, and what I'm picking up there is emotional intelligence and being self-aware of that emotion. Why is it there, and how can you turn it into something that works for you instead of against you? Yeah, really good. All right, so we're up to number 3 of your 9 principles now. The process monkey. What is a process monkey?
So what I talk about is, there's for every business unit, for every team, there's going to be fundamental processes that you cannot do without. And so what I kind of stress for the reader or the listener is that identify those. For a police officer in America, it would be the Miranda rights. You're reading someone's rights. For a nurse in an emergency room, it's taking someone's blood pressure. And so but there are fundamental things that you have to do. That when times are tough, when you're in times of crisis, if you have that foundational, that basis of, you've gone through those processes, you're going to feel a hell of a lot better leading, even when there's a lack of situational awareness. And so what I want to challenge people to do is identify those. What I talked about is my role as a CIA operations officer. We would do something that's called a surveillance detection route. For a Navy SEAL, it would be learning how to shoot. But for me, let's go back to my role. So I would, CIA officer runs an agent. That's a spy. We've recruited somebody. So on the streets of Cairo or Baghdad or Damascus, I can't go drive and see that person. I have to, because I don't want anyone to catch us. So what I'm going to do is a surveillance detection route. I'm going to take, for several hours, I'm going to drive in a vehicle, maybe get in maybe jump on a bicycle, maybe walk around, maybe put a disguise on. So ultimately, nobody is following me to identify this person that we have a secret relationship. That is a foundational, part of my job. And so that's what I've identified. That's the process that has to happen. I tell a story that I was in the Middle East one time and I was going to meet an agent who had critical information for us, for the US government. Washington really wanted it. And so off I go. But just like everything else that happens in life, we say Murphy's Law hits. And so there's terrible traffic in this Middle Eastern country. I'm missing these stops that I have to do to make sure no one's following me. All of my timing is off. So ultimately we do what's called, I aborted the meeting. I didn't go to the meeting and I came back to the CIA station, and my boss, who was actually incidentally Charlie, said, Mark, how was the meeting? Start writing right now. Like Washington is really dying for this information. I said, couldn't do it. I couldn't do my surveillance detection route. I couldn't put the agent's life at risk. So I aborted the meeting. We'll see him another time. And Charlie's response is, got it. He understood it, because that was just this foundation that we have to kind of lie on. So the key thing in the process, Monkey, though, again, when I talk, specifically to companies, is the idea is not to get mired in the process. You still have to have room to innovate. So innovation is still really important, but you still have identified that process. So here's an example for me. So as I told you, we have to do a surveillance detection route. I have to meet an agent. Terrible traffic in this Middle Eastern city. So as I was driving the vehicle, what would be my move on innovation there? Maybe I would take a motorcycle to weave in and out of traffic. I'm still doing that surveillance detection route, but I've created a new mechanism to get the job done. And so, innovation is still important. And so I love this principle because there are several things that are backbones. For example, let's jump into the sports world. In any sports world, what does an athlete have to do in the off season? They have to lift weights. You have to get bigger, faster, stronger in any sport. If you don't do that, you will not be a success. Period. So that's the process that has to be kind of sacrosanct. And so what I challenge people to do is identify those, because down the line, again, when there's a period of crisis, you're going to know, what? I've prepared. My team is prepared. We have the fundamentals down correctly, that we're going to be able to deal with this crisis situation. And so, this is not from the Harvard MBA class. It's from my life as an operations officer on the streets of the third world for the CIA. But I think I love this principle, because I think that it's something you can control, and people understand that you can control this. It's what you do in preparing. And so. And I love talking to audiences, and I ask them, okay, what is your process, Monkey? What is the fundamental process that you need for you to succeed?
There's some really powerful stuff here that I want to unpack here, Mark, and you've captured some really important things here. So this is not about doing process for process sake. And it's not about, that's just the way that we do here. That's never a good reason for doing something. You need to have a reason why you're doing these things. But what I'm hearing there, and I'm going to throw the word adversity back in there again, that when you're facing some kind of situation that you've never encountered before, you're problem solving, whatever the case may be, it's about getting back to basics. What are those fundamental foundations that will give you a solid platform to then problem solve from? And I love the analogy that you gave about the police officer, the nurse, et cetera, et cetera. So now have a think about in your business when you're problem solving, what questions do you ask yourself? What process do you do that is the base level that gets you started? I think if everyone looks inside your business, you'll be able to identify those and give yourself permission to flick those other processes for the time being that maybe are just part of your corporate process, et cetera. But you need to focus and get back to those.
One of the neatest things is when I talk to companies or teams, not every, and this is when you kind of got into a group, not everybody actually is in agreement on the processes. So that's the challenge. That's why I love that. And I say, okay, tell me the 4 processes you all need to succeed. People have different ideas on this. So my response is, okay, so now we're going to get somewhere because we're all going to agree. So because the communication is really important too. So everybody has to buy into these 4 processes. But so often with teams or business units, they don't even know what those processes are. So if you can get them thinking about it, it's super valuable.
That's an interesting exercise right there for people to think about. What are your first principles? What are those processes that would form the foundation of your business? Really good, Mark. Love these lessons that we're getting out of this one. All right, on to number 4 of the 9 principles. Humility is best served warm.
Right.
What does that mean?
So, first and foremost, and again, I think people would find this surprising, is that I think humility is the best character trait of an intelligence officer. Again, going back to it's tied in with adversity as well, but you have to be humble because, there's disaster is lurking every step of the way. And I'll tell you a story on this. And so, I was running an operational unit, several years before I retired, that was responsible for really going after, our biggest counterterrorism, or our biggest terrorist, foes, which was obviously Al Qaeda and Al Qaeda's offshoots. And we were conducting operations. And so, my team, my unit was being lauded, was being praised by the White House, by the president, the National Security Council. We thought we were a bunch of badasses. We were taking Al Qaeda members off the battlefield who were not only threatening the lives of Americans, but if you recall back in, the 2014, 15 time period, there was huge threats to commercial aviation, in particularly even in Asia, in East Asia, and the Pacific. And so we were worried that Al Qaeda was going to blow up airplanes. So we were trying to obviously track down those Al Qaeda members responsible for this. Well, in a counterterrorism operation, and these things happen sometimes, where we were trying to target an Al Qaeda members, we injured some civilians. This is a terrible part of the business. It's something you never want to do, and certainly something none of my superiors ever condoned. So I had to go up to the 7th floor. This is the top floor of the CIA, and explain to the 40 members of the leadership team, including the director and the deputy director, what happened. And so this is what I did. So I walked up there. And I said, look, I take this is on me. I own it. I showed some humility. This is completely my fault. I was the leader of this unit. This is what went wrong. These are the 3 things that we did to fix it. We've done that already. And then I said, any questions? And there was silence. And I walked out of the meeting and I thought, hey, I'm in trouble. I'm going to get removed from my position. The White House is angry. This is just a mess. And a senior operations official, one of my, senior most bosses came to me and said, that went well. And I said, what are you talking about? There was no questions. He said, exactly, because you showed humility. You owned your mistake right there. And everybody knows, by the way, that you didn't make the mistake personally, but nobody cares. But you ran the unit, so you owned it. You told them how you're going to fix it. And so move forward. So he said, well done on this. And then I went back down to my team and I told them what happened. So my bosses are saying, okay, Marc was humble and they fixed the issue. I go back down to my team and there were people on the team who made mistakes. They saw that I took responsibility and ownership for it. So then they, of course, it's unpacking it a little bit. They, of course, have more faith in me as a leader. So I talk about just the idea of humility as something that is really important, because just as we know, life is cruel. And no matter what profession you're in, you're going to face some tough times. You're going to be humbled. And it's how you react to that. That's really important, how you own that. And so I think a lot of it has to do with kind of taking ownership of mistakes. And that's all about being humble.
Yeah, great lesson there, Marc, and something for all of us. The answer here is to step in and stick up your hand and take ownership of those mistakes when they do happen so that you can be ready to process and learn from them. Your team will respect that. Everyone will respect that. When things go well, make sure you share that glory, right? So the opposite is the case. So make sure everyone understands the role that they played when things go well. You said it's best served warm, which tends to indicate you do it immediately. Why is it important to do it immediately? Because everyone is going to be looking for people to blame. And look, my contention is, as a leader, you take responsibility for what happens, period, no matter what. And of course, it's not going to be necessarily your individual fault, but leaders, have to step up. And what happens in your business unit and, in your team, it's your responsibility. That's what people look for. I think that's something that we don't see much of, frankly, back here in the United States. But it is something that will serve you well, because you get the respect of your peers, you get the respect of your bosses, your subordinates. But when I say it's best served warm, do it right away, own it right away, and people will respect you for that, and that's how you move forward. There's no doubt in my mind. And then the other, it's also the concept too of
I don't care. If you're a superstar athlete, if you're in the intelligence community, if you're in special operations, if you're an all-star brain surgeon, if you're the best lawyer on the planet, you're going to lose sometimes. You got to be a little humble. The best trial lawyer in America is going to lose cases.
Yeah.
The best doctor, in Australia is going to lose some patients, and it's terrible. But you better have that humility as well, because you also, if you don't have that, what's the opposite of humility? It's conceit. It's too much, bravado. That's not going to serve anybody. You're not going to learn. You're not going to move forward. You're not going to gain that trust from people, your peer group or those, above or underneath you.
In fact, it could become an area of weakness. If you are too overconfident, people will use that against you at times as well. They'll look for weaknesses. They'll look to bring you down, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
I want to dig a little bit deeper. I want to talk about in the moment. So you've given some wonderful sharings and learnings there about being humble when a mistake has already occurred and immediately sticking up your hand, stepping in and taking responsibility and accountability. What about in the moment? So come to this example where you've had a mission that has not gone well. What about in the humility in the middle of the mission? Where would that fit?
So, that's a great point too, because there also is a time where you do have to show some strength. And so, if something's going wrong, you certainly don't panic. You certainly don't, start, berating people. You kind of accept, okay, this is what's happened here. You have to have that sense of kind of calm and cool. What I would tell people is we'll deal with this later. So we have to kind of unscrew this situation right now. Something bad has happened. Let's stay calm on this. You don't want to get too emotional and of course then make additional mistakes. We'll figure out later on what happened.
Okay.
We'll do our after action review. But for now, let's try to, kind of get us out of this situation the best we can. And that, we'll talk about it. I imagine, when we talk about some of the next principles, when I talk about winning an Oscar, which is the idea, it does matter, how you react to situations. People are looking at you, you're on stage all the time. So I love that question because, when adversity hits, when it's, when obviously you have experienced some humility, it does matter how you react right there.
Yeah, cool. Okay. So what I was taking away from that is humility is not just for the after action review. It's important in the heat of battle as well. The one that I wanted to share a personal view on this one, that includes for me the ability to sometimes say that you don't know, all right? Because someone else in your team might know. So someone asks you a question and you genuinely don't know the answer, don't make it up. Right?
Oh, absolutely.
Be humble enough to say, well, I'm actually not sure. Does anyone else have any perspectives of this? That can be. So when I love this, Mick, the point you made. We walk into CIA headquarters. On the right side is the memorial wall with stars of 177 officers who've been killed. On the left side, there's a biblical phrase, and it says, "And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." But it's the idea of talking about honesty and integrity. And a key portion of that we are taught as intelligence officers is that if someone asks you a question and you don't know, you say that. Say, I don't know. And that is so critical. And I will tell you that in my world, not all of my colleagues always said that. In the corporate world, many people don't say that as well. But that idea of being, humble enough to say, actually, I don't know. But the next part of that is, and I'll get the answer, or we'll figure it out. Yeah. Because when you say, I don't know, that shows obviously an intellectual curiosity, but more so you're going to get it right because you're going to find out. Yeah. Good. But let's say you make something up and then, the team goes off in a direction that's wildly off because in fact, you're acting as a fraud. Mm-hmm. There's so many times I've been asked by very senior people, including down at the White House, ask me a question. I would say, I don't know. I'll get back to you. And some people take that as failure. I don't think that's failure at all. I think that's just being, it's honesty and integrity. That's such an important lesson to folks. And then just what you said as well as you build really important teams. If you don't have an answer, very often one of your team, one of the people you're leading does. So ask them. And operational planning, we plan an operation
I would sit down. I wouldn't say this is what we're going to do. I would say this is the goal. This is what we need to accomplish. What do you all think? Now they give me their input, and then I'll make a decision. But it's getting that input that is absolutely critical. So a lot of things that as a leader you're not aware of, and that you ask people around you that can really help.
Yeah, and powerful questions to give them the ability to speak up. Like, what are we missing here? What haven't we thought of?
Right.
Give them the platform. Give them the voice. Yeah, very good. All right, that is a nice build up towards one that intrigues me greatly. Number 5 of your 9 principles: win an Oscar.
Sure.
Tell us about this.
So win an Oscar is just the idea that you're on stage all the time. So leaders are on stage, and you have to understand and recognize that. That's not to say that and so you're showing a sense of strength. That doesn't mean, you can't act like a human. Everybody needs time off. Everybody needs kind of a time to I call it take a knee. You can show empathy. You can show, a personal side of you, but make no mistake, everyone is watching you. I tell a whole bunch of stories in the book, and I was in an embassy in the Middle East that was attacked by Al-Qaeda. A car bomb hit the back gate, didn't go off. There was a frontal assault. There's, there's bad guys shooting at the embassy. They're tossing grenades on our roof. And I remember I went and I was trying to open the weapons locker, the weapons safe, because we had to protect ourselves. We were scared. We were worried that I can say scared. I think my heart rate exploded. But we were scared they're going to breach the compound. So I was trying to break out the weapons, shotguns and such. And I was spinning the dial, and I'm saying I'm barely kind of keeping it together. I got it open. We handed out the weapons, handed out body armor. I am frankly, as in retrospect, I was terrified, because you should be terrified. But ultimately, later on, when I asked, we did an after action on how thank God, the attackers were killed by kind of security forces outside. The car bomb didn't get off. Everybody lived, at the embassy. But afterwards, I asked the team, I said, how do you think we responded? And to a T, everyone said, Mark, you actually were so cool and calm on this. Now, I was terrified. I didn't think I was cool and calm, but it was that outward sense that I portrayed. Now, but I didn't say to everybody, we're going to be okay. This is a really bad situation. So I wasn't lying to them, but it was that kind of, how I reacted to that. I think was something that I was really interested in even afterwards, because I kind of said to myself, why did I do well in that situation? Well, I'd been in war zones before. I'd been under fire before. But it's just that idea of winning an Oscar where you're on stage at all times. And I think that's a really important principle. In crisis situations, everyone is looking at you. So it can be, if you're talking about in sports, it's the manager. I use too many baseball analogies, but if the team is losing in the bottom of the 9th inning, and everyone's looking at the manager, well, the manager has to have that kind of sense of calm, even if they're not. And so, but this is something that is actually, I think is not practiced enough. You see leaders getting, and when I say emotional, it's either breaking down, becoming upset, too much bravado, but it's just that sense of calm that's really important, because everybody feeds off of you. And it was to me, it's a really worthwhile principle in how to lead in times of crisis. Everyone is looking at you all the time.
Okay. I want to share 2 things with you. The first one, I want to share a reflection on that. And second, I want to challenge a little bit and see where we go with that.
Sure.
On the first part, there's a psychological term called reflective learning. I'm going to tell you a story. This is a common story. I want to build it into a leadership lesson that aligns with what you're saying here. And that's about children. Every time a child experiences something new for the very first time, they take little sideways glances towards someone that they trust. And it's usually their parents, their grandparents, their siblings, whatever the case may be. And they're looking for signs. They're looking for signs. What am I supposed to think of this? Is this okay? Is this safe? Is it fun? Is it scary? What is this, right? So the one I always think about is the child's very first swimming lesson. So the child is going into a swimming pool for the very first time, and they will take those sideways glances to their mother, their father. If their mother or father at that moment has any kind of anxiety, fear, and it's written all over their face that they're scared of the water, that child will not enjoy the experience. And they may even develop a fear of water that may stick with them for some period of time. Whereas if the parent is all encouraging and, oh yeah, the water's fun, this is great, they may develop a love of swimming and go on to win an Olympic gold medal. Who knows, right? So that's reflective learning. And what I'm hearing from you there is, as a leader, remember that people are watching. You are setting the tone at that moment. So this moment that you're talking about, which once again, we at home, we can't imagine the stress that you are under. But if you panic, that is going to set the tone. If you stay calm, that is going to set the tone. That's my reflection on that. What do you take on my analogy there of reflective learning?
It's 100% correct. And, sometimes, I think about some of the stories I tell, I worry, my stepbrother, who's an emergency room doctor, he cautioned me on the book. He said, look, you have to write this, not for your peer group who've had these crazy experiences, but write it for a librarian, write it for a regular person who doesn't understand what it's like to be under fire. So I gave this talk one time to a group of entrepreneurs. And actually, so I felt good when someone came up to me and goes, look, I can't understand what you went through in that experience, but here's what I went through. He said, I had my own business and I had 10 employees and we weren't doing well. And it was Friday and I had to make payroll and I couldn't. Or actually, he said, I had 4 hours to make payroll and everyone's looking at me. Are we going to get paid? So everyone was wondering how I was going to react to this. And so that to me was, is a perfect example of some. So by the way, so my experience, has all this drama that actually is real. And in many ways is the employees have to go and pay the bills. What if they don't get paid for another 2 weeks? That's as real an experience as I had. And so this young entrepreneur said this was a traumatic time for him because he goes, I felt a responsibility to the people who work for me. I couldn't pay them. And so it was how I reacted, which was really important, which was to say very honestly, I can't pay you for the next 2 weeks, but we're going to make it through this. We're going to do a couple things to kind of get you through the next 2 weeks. And and it was things such as, perhaps, giving them a loan or something to help them. But it was how they reacted, was absolutely critical on situations that I think were just as real and just as meaningful, even more so than kind of my crazy stories.
Yeah, that's a great example of bringing it towards something that the majority of us would resonate with, as opposed to, not all of us have been in the heat of battle that you've been in. All right, so the challenge part for this.
Sure.
How do you balance that? This winning an Oscar, playing a role, setting the tone, all of these things. How do you balance that with authenticity? There's a lot of talk right now that, when you ask people, what are you looking for in a leader? Authenticity is nearly always on the list. How do you balance those two things?
So, but I think you do, and your example is perfect because as a child is going to look to their parent to see if it's okay to, jump in the pool. You have to be authentic. So if someone would look at me as an embassy is being attacked, if I said everything's fine, go back to work, that's not authentic. My point was, hey, we're going to do all we can together to get through this. This is a really bad situation, but I got this. We'll be okay. You give them a little bit of comfort, but you got to tell them the truth. You have to be authentic. And I think that is enormously important. And you're totally right. And that's what people are going to see through it if you're not. And by the way, I would argue it's not weakness to tell your employees, hey, things are tough right now. This is bad, but we're going to do everything possible to get through it, as opposed to saying, we're good, don't worry about it, I got this.
Okay.
So I think that authenticity piece is really important. And I try to kind of put that forward as I talk about winning an Oscar, because if you don't do that, then people will discount what you're saying.
Yeah, cool. That's a great.
So by the way, so if you're a kid, I think about swim lessons. You had me feeling guilty. I was like, I think I tossed my kid in the swimming pool. That's with our son. Here, go swim.
Okay.
But ultimately, the child analogy is just. I'm going to use that. I'm going to steal that from you. I will borrow it from you. I hope you don't mind, because I love
anytime.
It's just that small glance looking over at someone.
Yeah. Okay.
Things going to be okay. Well, Yeah, they will. But it's not to say that it's not going to be a challenge.
All right. Well, what wonderful clarification there. I'm going to borrow something from one of my good friends now, David Knorr, that most everyone has a BS radar, right? So this winning an Oscar, it has to be authentic, but always remember that people are looking. So you are setting the tone. If you panic, they will panic. If you stay calm, they will stay calm. It doesn't mean that you have to pretend everything is okay when it's not, because they'll see right through it. Brilliant.
That's right.
Okay, that takes us to number 6, family values. What does family values in a team environment mean?
So we talked about this earlier, but again, it's the idea of I don't believe teams can succeed if they don't have that kind of close knit bond.
Mm-hmm.
Now you don't have to like everybody, but it's the idea of kind of respecting everyone and being close enough to understanding what they're made of, and so. There's so many different. I told you the story about Charlie and kind of family values with him. When organizations, but I think my contention is when leaders do kind of these small things that kind of bring people together, it's really important. And so when I challenge groups on this, and I go back to my old life, and so the worst unfortunately a lot of our team bonding would be, maybe having a pint or two together. So I can't, I got to be careful and not say that going to a bar and kind of drinking is the way. That is kind of a classic of kind of military and special operations or intelligence. That's not what I'm talking about, but it's the idea of forming these bonds. You can have that love, with one another, and I think that's absolutely acceptable even to say that. I look at, again, I'm trying to go back to kind of, sports teams. But I'm also a big ice hockey fan. And I remember there's an ice hockey player named Marc Messier. He won a Stanley Cup for the New York Rangers. He then got traded. He's one of the greatest leaders in professional hockey history. And he always would, what did he talk about? He said, hey, the best times that we had together were on the team bus or on road trips. When you travel together, and this is what people can understand, a road trip, that's when people kind of bond together. And he was traded to the Vancouver Canucks, and he said he was really shocked, and the team was not close. And when they went on the road together, no one ate together, no one had dinner together, no one played cards. I mean, little things like this. And so it's the idea of kind of building that tight knit family, because I think there is something to be said for people who kind of care for each other. In my view, in my experience, that kind of the closest knit, the most elite high performance teams really did have that bond. And so when I challenge a group, I say, what do you do, to kind of foster this? And again, I'm not saying go out to a bar. And here's the answer that I love the most, and it's something that I employed too, is it's getting to know your people. One of the things at the end of my career, I changed really remarkably. As I told you, I don't think leaders are born. I think they're made. Is I would take maybe 10 people around me. And so if it was a huge unit, of course, I can't take 1,000 people, but I would take 10 senior leaders who work for me, and I would sit them down and I would say, tell me about yourself, nothing to do with work. And we'd sit there for an hour, and maybe we're over lunch or dinner or something like that. And people would, and so people are telling me things about them that I never knew. Maybe someone's a concert pianist. Maybe someone loves certain sports. Maybe someone on the side has this incredible hobby. So what does that do? It builds a bond together, but there's more than that. And again, in my kind of, strange world, is as we are doing things, operationally, to pursue U.S. national security objectives, the fundamental core thing that we do, for example, is we want to recruit people to spy for the United States. So let's say I gathered officers of mine at a station, and I learned that a young female officer played soccer in college, and that's her thing. She loves soccer. I would have known this. Down the line, we're planning an operation against a Chinese intelligence officer. That Chinese intelligence officer, we learn, loves nothing more than the English Premier League. That he is obsessed, or she is obsessed with Liverpool. Guess what? I now have an officer who, because I created this close family, values type atmosphere, I learned something about her. I can now use her to target this Chinese military officer based on something I learned from kind of, pushing this close knit unit. So I think there's it builds camaraderie, but there's also professionally, it can be really helpful too in pursuing your key objectives. And then, look, human nature is to want to be part of these close knit teams. I mean, the thing I miss the most about my life at CIA is that camaraderie that we have, especially when we face a lot of tough times. And so it's family values. It's kind of a common term that's used, but something that I think that people can really employ that quite easily too, and kind of building teams that really succeed.
Yeah, wonderful, mate. There's three really powerful things that I take away there, and then I want to build on what the word means to me and get your reflection on that as well. So we're talking about shared experience, whether that involves drinking or something else, having those shared experiences that bring people together. We're talking about a bunch of people that genuinely care and take an interest in each other. And we're talking about getting to know each other to the point where you can discover more about each other and build that connectedness. And your example of then being able to know that helps you to know what the hidden superpowers are of your team. You might have someone in your team that's fluent in Farsi, and you had no idea until you had a chat to them, right? So in your case, maybe you're all fluent in Farsi. I don't know, but in the business world, you uncover these things by having those experiences and getting to know each other really well. The things I know about family. Let's build on this for a second, and then you can think about it in your work environment. Families do deeply care about each other. The second thing is it's completely okay, and it happens, that families bicker and argue with each other from time to time. So it's not lovey-dovey all the time. You will have areas where you have healthy disagreements, maybe sometimes unhealthy disagreements, but you'll have disagreements and you'll bicker with each other. Right. But then if someone comes from the outside, and you might have just had a stand-up argument with your brother, but then if someone from the outside comes in and picks a fight with your brother, you're going to turn around and you're going to say, hey, back off, buddy. So not only do they care about each other, but they also protect each other in times of adversity. How does that sit with you, Marc?
Well, that's exactly right. Look, at CIA, we fought like cats and dogs with each other. But then when there was any kind of scrutiny on us from the outside, everyone would band together. That is 100% correct. Yeah. And the analogy to kind of siblings is perfect. Yeah, correct. As well. Look at brothers and sisters fight. Yeah, they do. But there's that blood bond. Yeah, and that's really important. And again, my content. I joke about in the beginning of the book. I said, look, I didn't get my MBA from Harvard. This is not to diminish a Harvard MBA. These leadership lessons are just kind of what I experienced. They're born from kind of the streets of the third world, and they're simple and they're basic. But again, they resonate because exactly what you said. People will say, well, I get this because I love my brothers and my sisters like nothing else, but they're a pain in the ass. And I fight with them all the time. Yeah. Okay. Got it. Okay.
Well, lovely analogy there as well. All right. Let's move on to number 7 of our 9. Be a people developer.
Yep. This is just the simple process, the simple concept of mentorship. Something that, we talked about Charlie again, he's a theme that runs through this book. But it's the idea of passing the torch. And I think that, at the end of my career, the thing that it's not, Mick, if you ever come to Northern Virginia, I'll bring you down to the basement and you can look at all these medals I have, all the fancy stuff in my hero wall, which is all BS because I don't care about that anymore. Because it's what I really care about is how I pass the torch to the next generation. It's this current station chiefs in CIA now who, I had a book event one time. And a couple of them came and they told this to my son. They said, Marc was the greatest leader that we ever had. And he taught us these things. And afterwards I was like, I'm going to throw my medals away. I don't care because that just kind of, that's what motivated me to at the end of my career. It's passing the torch to the next generation. It's mentorship. And so, but what you want leaders to do is to have that first and foremost, it's about mentorship. But I'm going to give you a couple examples in terms of crisis situations, why I think it's really important. So one of the things that I did, and it's a great example. So when I was in Eastern Afghanistan as a base chief, often I would have to travel throughout Afghanistan. So I was still the base chief, but unofficially I was leaving the base. I had 7 officers underneath me, the operations officers, the most senior. Each time I would leave, and I wouldn't tell anybody about this, I would say for the next 48 hours, you're in charge. and you're going to do everything because this is a learning process for you. I'm still in country, but you're going to lead. I jumped on a helicopter one time, and one of the officers looked at me and he said, "Mark, I'm going to hold down the fort." And I remember grabbing him. This is not a leadership principle. I grabbed him by his shirt and I said, "Don't ever say that. You're going to make every decision. I'm going to come back and it's going to be like, we're just going to hit the ground running." Because what he was saying to me is like, he was going to hold down the fort and not do anything until I came back. What I told him is, no, you're going to make every decision when I'm gone. Yeah. And this is the reason why. And I did that for every officer under my command, because when times are tough, if there's a lack of situational awareness, I know I've trained everybody on that team to lead. I've given them specific leadership opportunities. And so that's when I talk about, the idea of mentorship, it's for good reason. It's not just because I'm being nice. It's because you need to train people on how to lead. You have to pass the torch. And I think it's really important for especially kind of younger leaders to understand that, because so often, they think it's still, you realize it's not about you anymore very quickly as you kind of rise up in the ranks. A lot of young leaders don't understand that. So it's switching that mindset to the thing you're going to be remembered most for is passing the torch to the next generation. And so, to me, that was the most honorable thing and the most rewarding of my career.
Yeah, the two powerful things there, Mark. I like what you said about, hey, you're not the caretaker while I'm away. You're going to do this role.
Right.
And the second one is that you use the word leadership opportunity. People don't develop their leadership without the opportunities to practice.
Yep.
I'm going to give a really silly example here. One of the things that I love more than anything else in the world, in fact, it's what you do a lot now, Mark, by the way. I love public speaking. I know that there's people out there where public speaking is their greatest fear. For whatever reason, it's my fuel. I just love it, right? And it took me a long time to learn this in my career. But I came to this realization that any time that in organizations that I was leading, that there was an opportunity for a public speaking gig, it was like, yep, okay, I'm doing that. Yep, I'm doing that. Yep, I'm doing that. And it dawned on me one day that every time that I stand up, and yeah, I'm perfecting my craft, I'm getting better and better and better at public speaking every time I do it. But every time I stand on that stage and I deliver that speech, that presentation, I've robbed my team of the opportunity to do it themselves. And it took me a long time to learn that.
Right. Yeah. No, that's fascinating.
Okay. Number 8, this one caught my attention. Number 8 of our 9 principles, employ the dagger. First of all, it sounds very Shakespearean. And then secondly, what does it mean?
I'll switch it around. Remember the old, what was the movie Wall Street when they said greed is good? Yeah. Remember that phrase?
Yeah.
I always make this joke. My contention when I say employ the dagger is that competition is good. And we can't get scared of competition. And so why do I use the word the dagger? Well, the dagger was something, I served in the Middle East for most of my career. And so when we had an operational success, I would have gone out in the street to some street vendor and bought a little cheap wooden dagger that cost $10. And what I would do is I would hand these out to individual officers for their successes. There's no monetary value. There's nothing that's going to go in their performance review. But what I found with these teams is they would be crazy vying for this silly dagger because it was this status symbol that kind of developed in the team. And so it was the idea of fostering a healthy sense of competition. Because ultimately, I really do think that is how everybody rises up. Competition is something that's important. And there's a part of that too. And there's things I employed that I think, people can resonate with or will relate to. So I would do something. There's a lot of research on this. I would use something called a stand-up morning meeting, every meeting. And so what would I do? So the job of a CIA operations officer, you're out at night doing something every night. Maybe you're meeting an agent. Maybe you're providing counter surveillance protection for someone else who's meeting an agent. Maybe you have to go to a diplomatic reception to try to look for, I don't know, the Russian, ambassador who we want to speak with, but you're always doing something at night. It's what we do. It's not a 9-to-5 job. So, I would call people in the morning and I would have them, go around. They're not telling me what they did. They're telling their peers what they did each night. And guess what? Every once in a while, 1 or 2 people would say, would not have gone out. Now that's okay. Maybe it was their kid's birthday, or they had an anniversary, or they had to see the family. But what it would do, it would kind of foster this sense not only of competition, but a little bit of peer pressure. And it wouldn't even necessarily come for me. And so it's just, again, it's that idea that competition is something, if you do it correctly, fostering competition can be very healthy. Now you have to be careful on this a little bit, because you can't cut corners. The competition can't become so intense that people are kind of doing the wrong thing. But when I talk to groups, I would say, okay, so, how is competition, looked at in your organization, and what little things can you do, like that dagger, that would kind of foster this? And again, this is simple, it's easy, but it's my son plays college baseball. He called me the other day. Literally, it's amazing we're talking about this. It was actually yesterday. He said, "Dad, what do you think we can do? I want to reward." He's the captain of the team. I want to reward people on the team. And I said, well, look, I remember I saw sports teams go out and buy a silly fedora, silly hat. And every time the player of the game is going to get that hat, and they got to put it on and wear it as they're walking off the field. I guarantee you, in 1 month, everyone is vying for that silly hat. And it becomes this kind of bonding mechanism too. And so I just love the idea of kind of fostering competition. Don't be scared of it. Promote it, and really everybody can kind of rise together.
Wonderful. The three things I'm taking from that one. So healthy competition with the right boundaries brings out the best in people.
Right.
A little bit of gamification there, that if you make it fun as well, it brings things through. And the third one is how you're rewarding your people. And rewards do not have to be financial. They do not have to be bonuses, etc. It can be as simple as a handwritten note through to, congratulations, you won the fedora this week. What a wonderful example of that. Okay. All right. Awesome. Now it all culminates. Number 9 of your 9 values culminates with finding clarity in the shadows. What does that mean? So this is putting it all together, and I should have been clear in the beginning, just in the sense of, the principles don't have to kind of follow in a linear fashion, but it's not bad if they do. And so these are just things as you build your teams. And what I say is, at the end of the day, if you use these principles when there is, when you're in that gray, you're going to be able to be a better leader and make better decisions. You're going to find that clarity. You're going to actually be the one who's going to say, I'm actually okay right now. Everybody else might not think so. And so it's putting it all together. And here's an example that I give. I'd returned from Afghanistan, and my old team was looking for kind of one of the most senior high value targets amongst Taliban members in Afghanistan. I knew they were doing that, but I left. My job was over. I was back at our headquarters in a different assignment. I got called by someone and said, hey, can you come to this operations room? Because your old team is hunting. They think they found this guy. Now, what happens? Well, weather's bad, so we don't have satellite stuff. Communication's bad. Everything's wrong, to the point where our headquarters personnel, who have to make that decision to either kind of go or no go on the operation, are totally paralyzed. And so people kind of walked me through it, but I started thinking about it, and I said, okay, well, I knew I had a pretty good sense of the operation, but I thought about all these principles. So we had a tight knit team. We had family values, mentorship, all these individuals on the ground. They had actually turned into individually good leaders. It doesn't matter that the leadership back at our headquarters doesn't know what's going on. I know they're good, on the ground there. They had been through adversity. We had tried to go after this target many times. They had failed. They had learned from it. All those principles to me culminated in a senior officer looked at me and said, what do you think we should do? And I said, I think we should launch the operation. And he said, how can you say that? We don't know what's going on. And I said, actually, we kind of do. And I'm good with it. And he said to me, he goes, if you're wrong and this kind of, goes belly up, it's on you. And first of all, it's ludicrous. It's not, I'm not even assigned there anymore, but I just said to him back, I said, that's fine. Got it. And afterwards, and the operation was successful. And so we took someone off the battlefield who was a really terrible human being who caused the death of a lot of coalition soldiers and was planning to do more. But afterwards, someone came to me and said, how were you able to make that decision? And I said, well, it's pretty easy. And I kind of walked through all those steps that kind of got us to that place. So that ninth principle really puts it together. It's the concept that you can make decisions under times of a lack of situational awareness if you just follow some of these fundamentals. And it's the idea of just being happy in that gray area. And it's real. And when you get to that point, it's really interesting.
because it gives you so much more confidence. Now you have to follow the principles, but life doesn't seem so hard anymore. And I would just go back and think about 2 years of COVID and what businesses had to go through. There are real everyday, scenarios where you can kind of make that, make this really kind of resonate and hit home.
So what I'm taking away there, Marc, is that when you've built in these previous 8 principles, then as a leader and as a team, you then have the courage to be able to step into the shadows, to step into the unknown, and every business has their unknown territory,
right,
and enable you to take risks where you otherwise might not have, and risks that have a potential reward attached to them. So that
it turned out to be smart managed risk. I mean, that's exactly right. But it's the idea. It's that inner strength you have. It's not risk based on just taking a shot, a chance, with nothing behind it. It's managed risk because you've done these kind of foundational things to get you to a point where you're feeling comfortable. That's all it is. And so, and that to me, and when you get to that, it's that, you do have this kind of, epiphany, where I think you can be a lot more successful in life in whatever kind of business model, business sector you're in.
All right, Marc. So thank you so much for today. I feel completely kind of honoured that I feel like I've sat here and taken a one-on-one leadership class with someone that's teaching me 9 leadership lessons from a world that I can't begin to imagine what it's like to be in that world. But we've been able to translate those 9 lessons into everyday kind of life or everyday business. And I just feel so lucky right now to have had this conversation with you. And I feel glad that we're able to share this with the audience as well. And I know that they're going to take as much from it as I have. So thank you so much for your time today, Marc.
Thank you.
I want to finish off with our rapid round. These are the questions we ask all of our guests. So the first question, really interesting for someone with your background. What's the one thing that you know now that you wish you knew when you were 20?
That I would fail. That failure, that it's okay to fail. Failure is not acceptable overall, but failing is acceptable, and that's how you learn from it. I wish I knew that, and I wish I kind of embraced that concept, and because I got hung up too much in the past when I failed.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. What's your favorite book?
Oh, this is a great one. And my favorite book is by Stephen Pressfield, called Gates of Fire. It's about the Battle of Thermopylae. It's about the 300 Greeks who kind of battled the million Persians in 480 BC. And it's a story about sacrifice, about courage, about honor. It's a book that I gave to many of my officers at CIA.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. What's your favorite quote?
My favorite quote: "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing."
Yeah. And unfortunately that kind of pervades itself into everyday life. The behavior that we accept is or do nothing about becomes implicit acceptance. Yeah. Very good. All right, well, thank you again, Marc. A final question. I'm sure there's going to be people out there that want to know more. They want to get a copy of your book. They'd love to hear from you more, etc. How do they get in contact with you?
So, my email, and by the way, I answer emails. I get emails all the time. It's marc.polymeropoulos@gmail.com. I'm on Twitter prolifically, which is sometimes, the HarperCollins, my publisher, gets upset because I tweet about everything. But it's @mpolymer, MPOLYMER. I have a website, marcpolymeropoulos.com, where you can take a look at kind of the leadership part. And you'll see me on TV every now and then talking about international affairs, intelligence, and so I'm out there, but I'm very accessible, and I really do respond. Not to hate mail, but when people have questions about intelligence leadership, I love answering them. I think that's really important. One of the things that motivated me as a senior officer at CIA in retirement is that I think that the intelligence services are, the intelligence agencies are something that is misunderstood. So I like actually explaining why I think it's indispensable, for any country to have an intelligence organization. So hit me up. Love to chat with everybody.
Excellent. Thank you again, Marc. It's been such a joy having you on the show, and thank you for sharing so openly your wisdom and your experience.
Thanks, Mick.
Today's episode was brought to you by my new book, You're a Leader, Now What? The Proven Path to High Performance Leadership. The book contains many of the great lessons that we've learned together here on the Leadership Project podcast, together with lessons that I've collected over my 30-year career as a leader. The book is aimed towards first-time leaders, but really there's something in there for everyone. If you would like to show your appreciation for this show, we would greatly appreciate if you were able to go and get your copy of the book on Amazon as either an ebook or a paperback, and if you could leave us an honest review on Amazon. Thank you for listening to the Leadership Project podcast at mickspears.com. A big call out to Faris Sadek for his sound design and editing of our audio and video content, and to the whole team at TLP, Joanne Gozon, Gerald Calabo, Rika Vidanes, and my wonderful supportive wife, Say Spears, who is also our operations manager. This show would simply not be possible without you. If you've enjoyed the show, please leave us a rating and review at Apple Podcasts. You can catch the video podcast and our video of the week at the Leadership Project YouTube channel, and you can join the conversation at the Leadership Project Facebook community group. We look forward to bringing you more great content and interviews next week as we continue to learn together and lead together. In the meantime, please do take care, look out for each other, and always remember to challenge the status quo.